Hi everyone, it's me, Dan, your professor, ideally for a class. Today we're talking about the overview of social media finance. And this is the beginning of a series of just a couple videos about how the business of social media works. And this is upfront because in many ways it serves as a constraint or a condition of possibility for how the cultural and social products that we're discussing in the rest of the class can function. So first is the question. Why are there so few social networks? Now you're going to say, Dan, it seems like there are a jillion apps. And I'm like, an app is very different from a social network. Now, your dog walking app may think it's a social network, but it's probably not. I tend to break things down into four general categories for teaching sort of affective logics. The first is affinity networks. So networks that are based on your friends and family. So like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. Temporal networks, which are based on the moment that it is, the right now. Those would be Twitter and Reddit. Locative networks, Foursquare was here. I'm not sure there's anything in this space right now that really matters, so I say relics. This is where we get the discussion of Foursquare, the now deceased Yik Yak, and the European network, Jodel. And finally, creative networks. That's your Pinterest, your Reddit, your YouTube, your Tumblr, depending if you see YouTube as social media. In short, this is a highly concentrated industry with very well-defined market spaces. So you see just a couple of companies, and they really have not been able to get into each other's spaces that effectively, which can, in multi-sided market theory, be an example of multi-homing. Although I am not completely confident that each of these different markets is not independent within a larger social network economy. But that's a point for a different class to discuss. In short, it's really interesting to think, why is there only one social network for friends and family to get social support, in this case, Facebook? So Paul Krugman wrote, I think, a very nice blog post, just about 5 paragraphs in this graphic on your right here, about the demise of Google Reader in 2013. Now, this was a two-sided market. And what that means is there were two groups of people who had very different prices they were willing to pay for the same product. And let's be honest, most networks like Tinder or whatever else also have a really clearly broken down set of folks. So some folks who are there to pay and use all the features, and the other folks who just kind of make it go. So those are your high intensity versus your low intensity users. And he's got this right on. I use a very similar left declining graphic in a lot of my research. There are a ton of users, but very few of them are actually willing to be part of your core revenue sustaining group. So in the case of Google Reader, it just didn't make any sense for it to run because the revenue sustaining group was so big and the cost of running any service is actually pretty high. So this gets us to start to think about the different networks that we're looking at. And by networks, we're talking about those groups of people and how they are linked together. So let's take this a step further and talk about Metcalfe's law. Now, Metcalfe's law is that networks are a square of their size. And generally, you should just think bigger networks are worth more. And they tend to be worth, and it's not a linear thing, it's more than a linear thing. Now, I want to challenge this idea of it being a simple relationship a little bit, because sometimes there are nodes that are trivial or meaningless. I was teaching the on-campus version of this class this morning, and the students were all very excited about a challenge on Instagram. Can this egg get more follows than Kylie Jenner? Did that egg have any positive content? No. Is someone going to sell that egg's account? Yes. That node and people linking to it, it's trivial, it's meaningless. It tells us very little about the health of the network. Now, in the case of Snapchat, in the case of Friendster back in 2002, we could see this dynamic working the exact opposite way, that the trivial, meaningless nodes created the very network shape that made Friendster possible. At the same time, then, the removal of those nodes, while removing no positive content per se, did collapse the network by pruning out all of its most important crosslinks. So one thing to think about, what if highly linked nodes in a social network differ in kind, not degree? So what does this mean? We might assume that someone who has a lot of friends, say on Facebook, is very important to all of those people. What if people who have a lot of friends are something different than people who have a moderate number of friends? For this purpose, we'll consider people with very few friends to be pendants, and thus really not important to the network. So we have this issue where we have a variety of folks and a variety of network shapes. And we have to say, what if there are nodes that are meaningless, right? What if there are nodes that tell us nothing about the value of the network? And so this is where we start thinking about why there are so few social networks. So Facebook had a golden age of friending that we'll talk about next week, where lots and lots of friendships were made. And there aren't that many friendships being made now. Typically, students report making no friends within a week of entering the class or whatever else. They really made most of their last group of Facebook friends the first few weeks of college, if even that. So you say to yourself, big networks are valuable, but at the same time, people are really not that interested in building networks today. They're more interested in doing it on a much lower intensity platform like, say, Instagram. And this is something we really have to think about for the finance of these networks. The era of being able to build one of these quickly is over, and frankly, the fact that Facebook is the incumbent with this network means a lot. So how do you even get users today? It probably means you get in a car, drive to a college campus, and throw out a bunch of energy drinks or something. You might have to buy another company to get them onboarded. You might have to fuse yourself into a legacy media operation. The era where people would download apps just for the sake of it is over, right? And I can talk till I'm blue in the face about the economics of the app marketplaces, but it's really a game about getting people into a place where then they are advertised to. The idea that we were all going to have jobs making different app widgets for each other is not happening. And so this is a real big problem, right? If you have no users, it doesn't matter how great your back-end engineering is or what your cool idea is or how great your icon is. It's not going to work. Second, networks are expensive. Engineering is much more difficult now. It is not 2005. Mark Zuckerberg does not have move fast and break things as a mentality. That went away 8 years ago. If you're watching this video in the more distant future, say a decade ago. Why does that matter? Well, Facebook now is expected to function as a platform. Companies, other users, all sorts of folks expect to be able to plug into Facebook, and they expect Facebook to be up all the time, acting in a predictable way. And this is expensive, right? You do not go to Facebook and upload pictures and expect them to be stored in a rootable server with transparent file names like Dan1, Dan2. You expect all of those photo locations to be hashed in one-time use links. You expect Facebook to be able to understand and populate a network of hundreds of thousands of linked nodes at any given time with relevant content based on your boundary rules. Right? This is not Facebook in 2005 when it was just about who was in your college network. Look, when I started using Facebook, you could see everyone at my college because that's how it worked back then. Students typically now don't even remember that time period because they were small children. And this is really important. Facebook's initial iteration jazzed up those network effects by giving everyone access to a ton of profiles, even before the newsfeed existed. And so they got users much more easily, and the engineering was relatively simple. Now, users expect a very high level of precision engineering. Let's get more into this question of what platforms are. Platforms, and specifically access through their application programming interfaces, are ways that you can interact with large numbers of users using what functionally amounts to utility. So you expect to be able to log in with Facebook, have Facebook manage your credentials, and thus avoid a lengthy setup process. Trusted network effects in platforms really matters. Think about Amazon. Amazon, there were plenty of other potential online marketplaces, but once you developed trust in that marketplace, and they were customer-centered, and they facilitated transactions effectively, they were really in a driver's seat. Right? Why would you want to enter your credit card number all over the web when Amazon will handle this service for you? Now, for companies then that are trying to plug into Facebook service or use parts of Facebook services to expand their online businesses or apps or whatever else, this is really, really risky because it is a highly controlled space. Facebook sets the terms of how their API works. And so if you're a news company that was a Facebook preferred news partner, sending them news stories to be served inside of Facebook, you gave up on your ability to control that traffic and use your own ad exchanges. Instead, you gave all the power to Facebook, and that was the bargain. They gave you incredible trust and technical sophistication and heavyweight operations in exchange for ease. At the same time, then, if Facebook decides that the news is really bumming people out, as they did after the 2016 election, they can just remove the news. Of course, this misses the point. Facebook was having problems after 2016 because of Facebook's own misconduct, not because the news was bumming people out. The end goal for all of this is transaction facilitation. The goal would be if you can get people to do all their banking on Facebook, to just take a slight skim on all these transactions flying around, you can make a lot of money with relatively little overhead. At the same time, as we've seen, trust in Facebook is extremely low, and their dream of taking on this both hub and transaction facilitation role, I think, is fading. Now, there are two ways of thinking about the market. One theory is of two-sided markets, and that says there are two different groups in the same market that have different demand pools. So one set of people in an online dating market are willing to pay a lot to communicate. The other set are just kind of playing around, right? And so you have to figure out how to balance access between these groups. Because if you don't have the people who are unwilling to pay, you don't have a market, right? Now, this is kind of a sustaining dialectic, to use a cultural term for an economic problem. There are two different prices. And oftentimes you'll find dual product markets where both sides, or two-sided markets where both sides will prefer there to be a concentrated market. So when you go on an online shopping marketplace, you probably want lots of vendors there competing. And the people who are competing with each other probably want lots of customers there. And this can lead to extreme market concentration. Now, this is not to say that it is inevitable with these platforms, but I think in social networks especially, we have seen that there can be only one. There is a Highlander of social network products, at least based on cultural theory. And this causes some problems, right? So Facebook is a really great source of emotional support. It's ubiquitous, whatever else, but it has problems. And at times, it would be nice if there was another social network out there with which equilibrium could form. There are also dual product markets. And in the case of more traditional media economics, there was the idea that networks were selling customers or viewers a good product, and then those customers were then being sold on as an advertising good. The dimensions of this have expanded as these networks oftentimes now need to give enough content to people to get those people to make more content. This is why Facebook is always asking you things, why there's this tendency to have autotelic content generation, which means features on sites that automatically generate posts for you because the network has to be populated with content in order for you to care about it. And this is a really important idea, right? That you are both the product and the purchaser. Now, you can think about this more generally and think about you directly buying from Facebook, right? So the example I use in class is of the virtual goods era, roughly 2007 to 2008, when people would actually buy things like badges or access to some online playables. You then were directly buying from them. So there's one product, which was Facebook selling stuff directly to you, and then they also were still selling you for advertising. These are a little bit different. One is looking at the idea that something can be produced and consumed at the same time, and the two-sided market is a little more straightforward, saying there really is a single product, like a status or access to an interface, and that interface has different groups with different prices. So for dual product market, it's really about looking at a chain of processes, while for two-sided, you're looking at two people in a sort of equilibrium model. But so then, how do equilibriums form in this market? Honestly, I believe they form along lines of the social logic and cultural motive of the platforms. At this point, I am relatively willing to say that engineering is equal in this market. And I'm not just saying this from sort of economist's perspective, all things being equal, but that it seems that Twitter is very reliable, Reddit is reliable, Pinterest is reliable, Insta is reliable, Facebook is reliable. And so this market isn't going to be differentiated based on the technical capabilities of the platform. Instead, the market differentiates based on why you use that appliance and what it can do for you. At the end of the day, people need a reason to use your platform. There has to be some social and cultural payoff for it. And this is the problem of high modernism, as explained by James C. Scott. Generally, if you are in charge of something, it is very hard for you to see the problems because you have a sort of strategic view, while the users have a tactical view, which explains why, say, Friendster made its horrible mistake, right? And so going forward, you have to say, how can we manage our platforms? How can we do things necessary to make all the money we need to build the platforms, to get all the people on board, to do all the engineering? So look at this. The barriers to enter are so high, and the users are so fickle. That's why companies like Microsoft, with their division Microsoft Research, are doing extensive research to try to understand you and your preferences in the market. Because at the end of the day, your demand drives the existence of these platforms. So let me make sure I put that idea out there for you, because I think it can be a little tricky. This is a demand-driven market. It is not a supply-driven market. It is a demand-driven market, and you have to start building your model here based on where the demand is. And Amazon got this completely right. That's why they're customer obsessed. You have to work on cultivating demand and being sure that your company is where that demand will be satiated. This is not a supply market. This is not about cost containment or anything else. You got to figure out desire, and at that point, you can start building your network. Next video in this series is about the actual methods by which people make money on their platforms.